Let's get started. Welcome to Winter Flying with ForeFlight. In this webinar, we'll discuss how ForeFlight can help you stay safe and more aware while flying this time of year. Let's go ahead and meet our presenters for today. Josh and Atlas, tell us about yourselves.
Thanks, Jay. I'm Josh. I'm a manager on the pilot support team. I've been with ForeFlight for quite a while and been flying for even longer than that. My pilot's license can vote now. I've got a instrument rating and I've done most of my flying outside of the New England area, but recently moved up here, and so I'm very interested now in the aspects of winter flying that we're going to talk about today.
And I'm Atlas. I'm an engineer here on the MAP team, working on the military flight bag. Based up here in the north in Maine, flying in a lot of winter snow, rain, sleet, the usual northeastern wintry mix. So can have a lot of good content for us to chew on today.
Thanks, guys. On the agenda for today, we'll take a look at some advanced uses of map layers to determine if it's safe to fly. We'll also explore the different perspectives of weather you can get using Profile View in 3D, what types of data are available in the Imagery tab, and several different ways to use the briefing in flight planning. We'll look at how you can create your own checklist to make sure you're ready for winter flying, and then we'll look at the Documents tab and the useful information there that you can download to use in flight. After we finish planning our flight, we'll look at what types of winter weather information you can get in flight using ADS-B and SiriusXM. And after that, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. One last thing I'll mention is that portions of this webinar have been pre-recorded, so if you're following along and your map looks a little different, that's probably why. With that, let's get started. Atlas and Josh, over to you.
All right, Josh. Well, I thought we would take a look at some routes here through our neck of the woods.
Excellent.
And plan a flight through some of this snow, rain, sleet, so we can see some of the tools available to us to get a better look at what that's all going to be like in flight. So for today, I thought we'd come from Buffalo over to Portland. And just to make things a little bit worse, we'll kind of take our time and meander through some of this weather. Maybe we'll come down here and up to the north. So there we are, working our way through some of this snow, some of this rain. Would you want to fly this route, Josh?
I would say probably not, but let's dig into it and we can talk about some of the things we'd evaluate.
Yeah, fair point. So let's see. One of my first and favorite ways to look at a flight like this is the profile view. You get that through the FPL drawer. And some of you may not be familiar, but you actually have layers on this profile view. This is giving us a cross-sectional look at our whole flight.
Yeah, this is a great tool. I use it on almost every flight, even if I'm not flying someplace with major obstacles or terrain. The airspace obstacles and terrain are available for multiple plan levels, but some of the weather we're going to look at is in Performance Plus. And anybody who's watching this today, if you don't have Performance Plus and you'd like to try this out, just email the pilot support team at team@foreflight.com and they'll be happy to activate a 30-day trial of that for you so you can check it out for yourself.
Yeah, and fair warning, once you fly with these layers, it's hard to give them back. So
for sure.
They really add a great look to some of this weather. So I'll turn on Icing, which is relevant, and you can immediately see, similar to what we're looking at in the top-down view on the map layer, we now get a cross-sectional look at the icing along our route of flight.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that this is forecast icing. This is not actual, but these are a pretty good way to get a sense for whether this is airspace or a direction you want to actually be flying.
Right. And so the really cool thing with that forecast is if we shift our ETD forward later in the day, maybe we're planning this for the afternoon, that icing depiction is actually going to shift.
Yeah, it takes into account the time that it will take you to fly that route and automatically merges together different forecast time periods to give you a more accurate representation. One of the limitations I run into occasionally with this when I'm planning a flight in a few days is the US icing layer, at least, has an 18-hour look ahead. With the global layer, you can get a 24-hour look ahead, but it's a coarser look. It's not as high a resolution. So with either of these, it's really more of a short-term sort of, can I fly today, or maybe tomorrow if you're looking at the end of the day for the next day. But it's still a really good way to get a sense for, is there going to be a good altitude to pick or a good route to pick to avoid some of those conditions.
Right, and maybe this is a good opportunity to actually turn on that icing layer. So here we've got radar on now, but if we turn on icing, we can get this great depiction both top down of our route of flight and then also cross-sectionally.
Right.
And we can scan ahead just as we did with our profile. We can scan ahead to view that icing in the future.
Sure. It's good to point out the altitude slider on the right. That right now you were looking at the 2,000 foot, but as you slide it up and down, it gives you the forecast for different slices through the atmosphere there. And that's automatically incorporated into the profile view.
Right. Hey, Josh, here's a quiz for you. Do you know what these light, moderate, and severe labels actually mean?
Probably don't fly in it, and definitely don't fly in it.
Yeah, that works for me.
Yeah.
I actually looked it up. I didn't know they had a meaning. I'm sure they did. So light, which is that lighter color, that's a 1/4 inch of ice buildup over a period of 15 to 60 minutes. So within 15 to 60 minutes, you can expect a 1/4 inch of ice built up on your airframe. Moderate, that's the more medium blue. That'll be 5 to 15 minutes for that 1/4 inch of ice. And then anything less than a 1/4 inch of ice is going to be heavy. We actually do have some periods of heavy or severe icing.
Yeah, those would be ones I would avoid. And, looking at this route, it looks like we could go a little bit lower and be out of it mostly, except kind of in between Syracuse and that other airport.
Yeah, and so we can actually use this scrubber here on the side and just pull down and preview those other altitudes. So maybe 4,500 is going to work for us today. And we can match that up over here with the slider on the map layer. Or we might be lucky enough to be in a high performance machine and we could, could we climb over this stuff? Yeah, it looks like if we could get up to, 20,000 or so, we might be able to get over the top of this stuff. Sadly, that's not a reality for me, so we'll come back down to something more manageable. 7,000. And let's match this up and just say we're going to depart now. Here's another cool thing. Say you wanted to mark some of these periods of high intensity. I think you actually showed me this trick, Josh. But if you hold on the profile view, you'll get a sort of pointer that you can see.
The green dot there. Yep.
The green dot. And so we could maybe mark this and look closer at that period of severe icing.
Yeah, with the annotation tool on the left, you mean?
Yeah, sure. We could do that. So we can take an annotation and we can maybe just draw a line there. That's something to keep note of. Or maybe this could also be relevant. At around this point, we know that that icing is going to drop way down. And we're not really going to be able to go lower to get below it. So that's kind of going to be a no-go, or a go-no-go point for us in our flight plan. If we're not happy with what we're seeing, it's really only going to get worse from this point on.
Right. We've been looking mostly at the ice here. Another aspect that I'll often use is taking a look at clouds. And you can do that both on the map itself and in the profile.
Yeah, great point. So one of the great things about profile is we can actually stack these two layers. And so we can get clouds and icing in the same graphic.
Now, Atlas, you were talking about some other tools that you use, which was a real eye-opener for me and not something I had taken advantage of, looking at the satellite layers on the maps page.
Yeah, good point. We have so much capability these days with some of these aggregate layers like clouds and icing and temperature, dew points, ceiling, sky coverage, etc. Those are products that we put together using many sources of data to give you this rich information. But the Color IR satellite can still provide a really quick look at global cloud tops. I'll show you how to estimate that. And also areas where supercooled liquid droplets, which are key to airframe icing, could pose a problem. So this is the Color IR satellite. I'm assuming you, like me, we probably don't. This isn't your first tool to plan a flight.
I'll be honest, it hasn't been, but I'm going to start using it more often now with what you're about to show us.
Yeah, me too. Actually, it's kind of been an eye-opener. So it's important to note when we're using this layer, basically what this is, you'll see on the bottom here we have a temperature scale. So that's 47 Celsius is the white, and then moving up to the more purple, that's going to be minus 64, minus 70 Celsius. And that is the temperature of the cloud top. And so what can we do with that? Well, first of all, we have to account for the surface temperature. So if I come to imagery, you'll see that the satellite product, infrared, this actually doesn't account for the surface. Or you'll see one big color all the way through, 28 Celsius on the bottom, up to minus 68. Our layer on the map attempts to mask out that surface level. So you can see over Florida, rather than showing it as red, or the surface temperature, we actually mask that out because we know that sky is clear.
Nice.
But the best way to work through this, and this is an important one to remember, Josh, is to turn on this sky coverage layer. What we can see now, see the colors here?
Yep.
Even though we're picking up a color, we can actually see that the skies are clear. So we'll want to disregard this. This is just the surface temperature.
Okay.
Another way to do this, we turn on the temperature layer. We can see this is surface temperatures across the US, right? So 9 Celsius here in Texas, 10 Celsius.
Oh yeah, and it pretty much matches the legend at the bottom for what the temperature is there.
That's exactly it. And so we can tell if the surface temperature is 8 and it's matching the legend, that's probably not the cloud top temperature.
Got it.
Whereas if we come over here, 0 Celsius, we can see we're nowhere near that orange on the graphic here.
Right.
We're actually showing something more like minus 48. So that's a way to see that the cloud top is actually minus 48.
Okay.
So that's a little precursor, but what can we do with this information? Why is that relevant? Well, we can actually estimate the height of that cloud top by matching up the color with the winds aloft. This is borders on a party trick. It's not super accurate, especially not now. If we look at this winds, we're going to see this data is almost 10 hours old. So we might see a discrepancy here, but let's pick the color. What would you say that's closest to? Minus...
I don't know, between 16 and 24 there?
Yeah,
20
I'll go with that. If we now come to the winds section, we can see those temperatures aloft. So that's looking like 18 or 21,000 feet. That's where I'm seeing that minus 22 to minus 28. We're somewhere in that range. Does that look right to you, Josh?
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So if we turn on the clouds layer and scroll on up, here's 16, there's 24, 18. So we could see some clouds at 18.
Yeah.
That's probably what we're painting on the low end. And then we're losing them up here around 24,000. So we were in the ballpark, right?
Yep.
We knew they weren't 5,000. We knew we weren't going to be able to climb over them in our machines. All right, so there we saw how we could use the Color IR satellite to estimate the cloud top height. And again, it's an estimate. It's borders on a party trick, but it is a nice way to see, hey, what's going on? Could I even consider climbing on top of this for the whole US?
Yeah, it's part of your kind of holistic look at what's the weather going to be like for this trip, or can I make this trip?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Josh. And here's another really important bit of information that this can give us. The areas of light green, light blue, and yellow here. This is a great indication of a warmer cloud, which can carry supercooled liquid droplets. Supercooled large droplets, there we go. Man, it's hard to keep track of all these terms. Let's stick with SLD, that way I won't embarrass myself again. So these areas can carry SLDs, which is a high potential for airframe icing. If we actually turn on the PyReps layer, we can see most icing reports occur in areas with this light blue, green, or yellow regions.
There you go.
So if you look here in the darker blue, and it's not to say it's impossible, but here we have some negative icing, more negative icing. It's just because the cloud is so cold. It doesn't carry much moisture. Over here, in these warmer clouds, we can see we're actually getting reports of icing. Here's some light to mixed. Here's some light rime in a turbulence report. It's a nice way to get that important airframe information, airframe icing information at a glance for the whole US.
For sure, adding that extra PyRep layer is one that I sometimes forget to do, and this is going to be a good reminder to me to keep that in for future plans.
Yeah, and some new uses for color IR too for an everyday weekend pilot like myself. Typically, I'd look at a layer like this and say, oh, that's too advanced. Let's distill this down. But there is some great information you can pull out of it for every type of flight.
Right.
While we're on the map here, Josh, how about we look at some other layers that we have access to?
Definitely.
Do you ever use the Dewpoint layer?
I am not a big user of that yet, but let's talk about it and we'll add that to the list.
Okay, we'll add it to the list. So I fly carbureted piston aircraft, which are highly susceptible to carburetor ice.
That'll get your heart pumping when it happens.
Yeah, you can say that. And as we know, carb ice can occur at basically any temperature and any phase of flight, really.
Right. Even in Texas.
Even in Texas. And here's a great demonstration of that. So this is the Dewpoint Spread. You're probably familiar with the other layers, right? Here's our temperature layer.
Yeah.
And so that's surface temperatures. And we could click in on these and get the dew point. So here's 12 is our temperature and 6 our dew point. And that spread is a really good measure of relative humidity, or how much moisture is in the air. That value directly correlates to how at risk we are for airframe icing. So, or carburetor icing. Airframe icing will be something else. If we turn on that Dewpoint Spread layer, there we can see that's 6, just as we did by working it out the hard way before. 12 minus 6. And what can we see up here in the northeast?
Not a very big spread up there.
Yeah, not a very big spread. So probably quite moist, humid air, which is going to make us more susceptible to carburetor icing. I've pulled in a little graphic which can explain this a bit better using documents. And this is a really cool tool, documents, which we'll dive into a little bit later. But you can see with a spread near 0, we're at risk of carb ice almost at any setting, depending on the temperatures outside. So we're nearing that 100% relative humidity range.
Oh, yeah.
So just something to consider in your pre-flight planning. It's not going to make a, no-go decision for you probably, but it can start adding pieces to that puzzle as we build our flight.
So Atlas, we've been planning this flight here on the maps page, and I'll be honest, I do that an awful lot, especially when it's a more local flight, and even for some of the longer cross-country flights, just because you can throw so many useful pieces of information onto the map. Once you've done this route planning, though, you need to send it to flights if you're going to file the flight plan, or if you want to get more detailed weather briefing.
Yeah, so let's do that. Usually my favorite way is this FPL drawer. Typically we've got the flight planned, we've chosen our route, and I'll hit this little arrow and I'll send to flights. And now we've brought all that same information, pre-formulated our ETD, destination, departure, our aircraft. Here's a quick peek at that map, just that same radar. And here's the route that we typed in on the map.
Yeah. What you can do too is if you just pick a departure and a destination on the maps page and send it through to here, when you tap routes, you can get recommended routes if you have a higher plan level, or just airway routes, ATC cleared, and so forth. Something to remember, though, is if you make a change to the route on the flights page, it does not automatically push it back to the maps page. So you would have to send it back separately once you made that change.
Right, so maybe it's looking like we're probably going to have to go IFR even if we are going to do this one. So let's select one of these, update the altitude, and we could send that now back to the map if we wanted to preview it here.
Exactly, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that matches my workflow as well. I find it a really nice way to use all the tools at hand. So off we go. Do you use the briefing? I'm sure you do.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. I absolutely love the briefing. It's an amazing way to generate a dedicated, compact chunk of relevant information for your flight. You just hit this button right here, and we're going to retrieve that briefing. So that's using all the information we pre-filled in that flight, our type of aircraft, ETD, destinations, etc.
Yeah. A couple of little comments about the briefing. We sometimes get questions to the pilot support team of, hey, do you have something that proves I got a briefing? And if you tap the briefing button, then yes, we archive a copy of that briefing that was generated. Or if you come to this page and you don't tap the briefing button, but you file the flight plan, a briefing is generated at the time that you file the flight plan. So both of those ForeFlight keeps a record of in case you're ever asked to prove that you pulled that up.
Yeah, that's great. Dot your I's and cross your T's.
Yeah, we're looking at the HTML or the graphical briefing here. If you are planning a flight that includes a segment outside of the USA, then it automatically switches over to a PDF briefing. And that's based on the weather sources and other information that we have for flights outside the US. So if you're planning a flight within Canada or crossing over the border into Canada or anywhere else outside of the US, even if you've selected the graphical briefing, it will show you the PDF briefing because that's what we've got available.
Good points. So we can just run through this briefing one by one. It's typically a good way to start. If we're going to actually do this flight, I go section to section. You can see the unread sections up here, 24. And I just keep on tapping next and skipping along. So, SIGMETs, AirMets, we know it's going to be IFR. And here's the information on that passing time. Tap through these in any number of ways. Mountain obscuration. Again, we can flip through these. Icing, that's going to be relevant for today.
Yep.
So we can see severity moderate. That matches up with what we saw on the map layer.
Yeah, it also has the altitude range of that forecast too. Base at 10, top at 21. So
right.
Not a guarantee, of course, but a good idea or a good way to get a picture of what it's going to be like.
Right, and we've got that same great product for turbulence. So there's turbulence low, and again, that's looks like we're just outside of that. We can zoom in on this map and see, yeah, looks like that low turbulence is actually a bit south of our route today. High turbulence, that's going to be over 18,000. And wind shear. So we picked a good route. This is going to be a lot of fun for you, Josh. I'm going to stay home, but I'll let you fly this one after.
Oh, thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Synopsis, here's another great one. This is a surface analysis chart. And all these images, you can actually tap and zoom in and get a better look.
Nice.
Yeah, so we can, again, we're likely going to be looking at that radar on the actual Maps tab, but it's nice to have it reiterated here for us. Current METARs. This is one of my favorite. Do you like this, Josh?
Yeah, I really do like this. This is a great way to get an overview of what the entire route looks like.
Right, you get all, so you've got the markers with the color, so red for IFR, blue for marginal, pink for low IFR, green for VFR. Sadly, none of that today. And then you actually get the textual breakdown below. So
right.
You can see a few little moments of nice green skies. PyReps is great too. What a more valuable tool than a PyRep. This is someone in the air who's saying, here's what it actually is like.
Right.
So here's sky condition, overcast 1400 on final. That's helpful. Base is 1400. Turbulence reports. Let's see, any icing? Yeah, it looks like some icing here off the coast. It's a nice way to get relevant PyReps for your route of flight. That's one of the benefits of the briefing. It's all the information you're going to be given is relevant to that route you've chosen.
Yeah.
Here's one of my favorite sections, the forecast section. This is all great imagery generated by NOAA, the FAA, other sources, which we can compile for you and display in a really, really handy section here. So on the left, you can see the sections, east, northeast, and CONUS. It's the entire US. And then also the active timestamps. And so the earliest one is going to be the closest one to our departure time. And the latest one, the closest to our landing time.
And Atlas, these are the same kind of imagery you can get on the dedicated imagery tab, but it's focused specifically on the area of the route.
Exactly. So rather than having to come through this nice big list of amazing content and choose your flight levels and your areas and your time, which is relevant to you, the briefing tab does that all automagically. I really like it.
Yeah.
Surface winds, visibility, precip. Precip's going to be relevant for today. So yeah, looks like a nice day to go for a flight in the Northeast, that's for sure.
Yeah, this one I would probably be pushing out a day or two.
I don't blame you. TAFs, this is great. This is, of course, a forecast product similar to the METARs from before, or similar in presentation, except it gives us a look ahead. You're going to see the selected label on the side is going to be the most relevant TAF report to the point of flight when you're over that point.
Yeah, that's helpful to see because you know when it is you're crossing and you can see what the forecasts were prior to and subsequent you're passing there.
That's exactly right. And think about how, not necessarily difficult, but how many more steps that would be to get to on the map. So here we are, we're going to find Albany. We're going to pull up the weather. We're going to pull up the TAF. We're going to look at when we got there. Okay, rooms, leg, roughly when are we going to be here, and try to match that up on the TAF. Well, with the briefing, all of that just happens for us. We know right here, around 1808 Zulu, we're going to be coming over top near Albany. It's going to be IFR, light rain, snow, mist, overcast 900, a beautiful day.
Gotta love it.
Vertical cross-section chart, you use this one much, Josh?
Yeah, I do. It's not so much for the terrain across the bottom, but it gives me a sense of what it kind of summarizes what the wind and icing and turbulence may look like along the route. So it's a nice way to kind of summarize what we were seeing on the maps page with the profile view and with the individual points on the route.
Yeah, right. This reminds me a lot of our profile here. Winds aloft, this is helpful for temperatures as well. Winds and temps aloft.
I like having that in flight as well. If I've filed for 11, say, and the winds are massively different, then this gives me an idea of well, maybe would it be better to go up to 12 or 13 or down to 7 or 9? Again, it's a forecast, so your mileage may vary, but it's still nice to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And typically I'll use it because I favor a comfortable ride over almost anything. So if I'm getting beat up at 11,000 and maybe I'm willing to accept less of a tailwind at 7, I can use this to sort of make that trade. Hey, looks like it's 6 knots less, about the same direction here at rooms. Well, it's going to be way more comfortable, and we'll go down and kick back rather than be beat up. So yeah. I love the winds loft table. Handful of NOTAMs to go through, and of course, if we're actually going to do this flight, we're going to be coming through these. I think the ones relevant for us today are going to be some of these runway surface conditions. So we can see here at Buffalo, I've got 555, 100% wet. I always have a hard time remembering these numbers. Do you, Josh? Maybe I'm just...
No, I do as well. I think it's more relevant to some of the more commercial operators, but...
Yep. Well, what I've done regardless is I've found a document from the FAA, and I've actually imported it into my documents in this little winter flying binder I made. So I can hop on this and see, hey, what does 555 mean? Well, it means braking normal, directional control normal, and an eighth of an inch or less of slush, dry snow, or wet snow.
Nice.
So a little bit of snow, but not too bad.
That's pretty handy.
Yeah, this is handy. Documents is a great way to store some of these resources, and you can use binders to make them easier for yourself to find.
Oh, sure.
We'll send out a link to this FAA document for you to import for yourself if you'd like. It's a FAA publication, AC 91-79A. So, back to our flight. Going through NOTAMs, navigation NOTAMs, and we can crawl through this. But here's something I do, which I don't know if people do often. Maybe this is something new for you too, Josh. I love that forecast package. I just love having all that relevant information at a glance. So even if I'm not considering a flight, maybe I'm looking at Albany or South Albany, how about, and we're going to come up to Concord. If I just want a great package of relevant information for this flight on Friday at 9 a.m., I can send that to Flights and generate a briefing. And now, rather than hunting and pecking through 100 screens and layers, which are all brilliant, I'm actually just going to come right down to this forecast and get some of that content we saw before.
Yeah.
So you'll notice by doing that, we've got TAFs, wind chart, a vertical cross-section chart, and a winds loft table generated for us automatically rather than having to hit through all those different taps to get to the information we need.
That's pretty handy. And I think for the products that are grayed out there, that's because the planned time of flight is beyond the forecast period. So if we were really going to make that flight as we got a little bit closer to it, you could just go back into the briefing and hit the little refresh button that's on the flights page, and that would regenerate the briefing.
So at the end of it, we get a really holistic view of what the severity is and what the type of winter weather we're going to be experiencing. For today, it looks like a little bit of everything, which is the Northeast special.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually a good example right there. If you pull that back up, Atlas, you see the cloud sort of appears to cut off abruptly, and then we've got some hashed lines, and you've got two issues showing. So if you tap the warning flag, it'll tell you that it's not available for the entire flight, and this is just the duration or the how far out the forecast looks. This is how we represent it on the page when you've got some but not all the information.
Nice. I'm glad you caught that. That's a great point. And so if we bring this flight back to now, we'll get those issues resolved.
There we go, yeah.
Here's a cool trick. You can use ruler, which is 2 fingers on the map, and still access all that amazing profile information for the section that you're scanning with your fingers.
Yeah, that one's really cool. That's something to keep in mind with that is when you put the ruler down, the profile is showing you the right now time. So if you've planned a flight in 4 or 5 hours and you throw the ruler on, the time is basically now, not that forecast ahead time.
Right, that's a great point. This is a way to look at the current products only. Another cool thing is maybe we want to know, what's this little blip look like? Well, it looks like icing and clouds, but if those weren't on, we can actually access them here. Turn off the airspace, icing, we just want to look at the clouds. Or let's add in turbulence. Looks like there's some turbulence there. And that's using the ruler that we dropped on the map, and then using the profile layers to sort of inspect that. All right, Josh, we took a look at some of the powerful layers we have access to in profile, icing, and clouds. But why don't you give us a demo of how we can view those in 3D?
Absolutely. It's this flight here from New England down to New Jersey. You can see we've got a pretty solid layer at 8,000 that we probably wouldn't want to go into. And if you've got Performance Plus, you can hit 3D to get a 3D preview of your route, and you can select different layers here. So you can see we've got the obstacle layer selected on, and if you zoom in, you can see the obstacles show up nice and cleanly there. And in this case, we've also got icing selected. And over on the right here, the altitude slider tracks your route. So based on the climb profile that you've got as you're flying along, it looks like, you know what, we're doing pretty well here. But you can use 3D to kind of explore what would different altitudes look like. So if we picked a higher altitude, like you can see at 9,000, this is putting us up in the layer. And we've got this kind of skeletonized view of what the layer is. And if you zoom out to be a little farther away, you can see there's that hole that's kind of a telescope, if you will, down to your aircraft. So this is showing you pretty conclusively that above your altitude, there is a layer that you wouldn't necessarily want to be in. And you know that matches here if we go back and we picked 11,000 along where we were headed. It puts us right up into the ice layer. And if you look in 3D then, you can see we're climbing up and our route shows definitely going into that layer. So this can be, in addition to helping you plan what it looks like when you're coming into land at a particular airport, looking at 3D can give you a good perspective of what the layers look like during your route and once you get closer to your destination.
Such a powerful tool, especially when there's terrain below you. New Jersey is pretty flat, but if you're in an icing situation on the West Coast or Rockies and such, just being able to really visualize and get an early sight picture of how much space is between you and that layer above can help inform your decision and your flight planning process.
No doubt.
So we demoed documents a little earlier to show that FAA publication here, that's the runway surface condition.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to show you how to access some of the amazing FAA content that's actually in your app already, relevant for winter flying. So there's a drive here, and you can click through it and scan, let's see, winter operations. That's pretty good. And here we see cold temperature restricted airports, holdover time guidelines, but you can also search. I actually didn't know this until I tried it today, but I can search here, aviation weather. And there we can see right away an FAA document, aviation weather. I was looking at it earlier, but this is an amazing handbook for all sorts of products.
Yeah, I really like putting these documents into the app. Well, they're in the app. I'm like making sure they're downloaded before I take off. It's
right.
On some longer flights, it's nice to have some relevant reading material. And if there's ever something that I need to look up, as long as you've downloaded it first, you can access it even if you don't have internet connection while you're airborne.
Yeah, good point. And so some things you might want to look up are these imagery tabs. A lot of this imagery actually has descriptions in the Aviation Weather Handbook. So I've bookmarked a few pages. Here's the forecast icing product. And this is going to give us more information on what we're actually seeing here.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's imagery. See if I could find it. Icing. And here's that. Yeah, here's that same product. Maybe we're confused about what some of these sections mean. Well, all that information is actually right here in the handbook. So you could go ahead and find some you like and bookmark them for yourself. Let's bookmark this one here. Perfect. Light reading. Another nice one I wanted to mention, flight in icing conditions. There we can see another FAA publication, flight in icing conditions. And I was scanning through this one earlier too, reading up on rime and mixed ice, induction icing for our Dewpoint segment. But this is another great document which you can find and add in-app and download for the next time you're stuck at an airport waiting for the fuel truck.
Right, or waiting for the ice to clear.
Yeah, more like it. All right, Josh, well, a moment ago we looked at some of these FAA documents for winter flying, specifically this cold temperature restricted airports one. Now, this is a pretty verbose list, a little bit hard to go through. I think you made something really cool using custom content to get a graphical representation of this. Do you want to maybe show that off?
Absolutely. So I created a content pack with a colleague of mine, John Collins here at ForeFlight. And that content pack takes the tabular information there, the big wall of text, and turns it into a couple of easy to see depictions here. So we've got both labels showing the temperatures that different airports are affected at, and showing the airports themselves. So you can use this content pack and the layers here to see if you're flying into an airport where there is a cold weather barometric adjustment that you need to make. And that's all detailed in the AIM, which is another document that you can get right out of the FAA drive in document section here. It's section 3731 shows that. But the neat thing about the content pack is that you can go in and turn off the labels, for example, if you don't want to see those, because they do clutter things up a little bit. But as you zoom out, you see various different little circles here around the airport. And if there's one that you're interested in, you can zoom in and turn the label on to see the temperature at which that airport is affected. So for those of you that are flying aircraft that are affected and are flying into these airports, this content pack is a quick way to have a sense of whether you need to account for that on your approach. And I think we're going to have that content pack available at the end of this webinar. You'll be able to download it.
Awesome. I'll take that any day of the week over 9 pages of text. So
for sure,
cool representation. For sure. And a great use of how custom content can bring visualizations to data and enhance your flight planning.
It really is amazing how usable it becomes when you put it on graphically instead of just a big wall of text. So that was a fun project to work on.
Yeah, nice job.
You know, Atlas, one of the things I look at really regularly when I'm planning a flight is the daily weather. This is something that's in all of the ForeFlight plan levels, and you can access it in several different ways. Directly from the airports page. If you pull up an airport here under weather, you can see the daily weather. And this shows you a 10-day hour-by-hour forecast of what's likely to be happening at a particular airport. It is a computer-generated forecast. There is not a meteorologist involved with it, but it's a consistent forecast really worldwide. So you're looking, or the system that generates this is looking at the same set of data and giving you this forecast for any point on Earth. It's super handy, I think, to be able to look out a few days ahead and see what is the weather likely to look like. So if we're looking here going into the Philly area and we look at weather and the daily weather, we can see, Thursday, not so great. Friday, a little warmer with showers, but I really like the look of Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. So I'll often use this if I am contemplating a longer cross-country flight and I've got a little flexibility about when I do it. And I'll just, a few days out, start looking at the daily forecast and I'll write it down. I just make a scratch pad and say, today the Sunday forecast looks like X. And then I'll look at it tomorrow and see, has the Sunday forecast evolved? And if it looks like it's pretty consistent as we get closer and closer to the day, then I'm pretty confident that that's going to be what the weather is like. I have had a few instances where just because the weather is very energetic and changing a lot, that the daily forecast does change as you get closer and closer to it. And, you have to cancel a flight now and again. That's the reality of being a general aviation pilot these days. So it's still really helpful, I think, to have that kind of view of what the long-term weather would look like. And, to be able to zoom in here and see sunny all day, and then just to scroll along and look at various different days. And you can even jump ahead by tapping at the bottom and see what the likely forecast is going to be is, I think, a super handy feature. One thing that some people have been really surprised about is you can actually access it right from your home screen if you've got your ForeFlight icon. So if we close out here and then touch hold on the ForeFlight icon, you can tap local forecast. And what that will do is give you the local forecast for your exact position, for the lat long of where you are. So if you're headed out to go fishing or to go do something outside and you're curious, what is it going to look like today? You can touch hold on that icon, hit local forecast, and then this will pop up with what your upcoming forecast looks like. So
I love that trick, Josh. It's so convenient. Once you do it, you can't stop but do it again. I have to admit, that's completely replaced every other weather app on my phone. It's just so convenient.
It's definitely nice to have it be in a consistent format and to kind of be in an aviation specific look and feel. Even if you're not going to be aviating that day, to be able to look at this and say, yep, low IFR, and I'm not expecting to have a nice sunny day.
Right, and we've got the category coloring on the bottom there, so you get a really quick glance. IFR,
right, down in kind of the
IFR.
timeline area at the bottom there shows
exactly.
you what the little summary looks like. So that's a thing. That's something I'm pretty keen about as far as planning for even a short flight, but definitely for a longer cross-country flight. And
me too.
As kind of a tip, what I will do sometimes, this isn't a very long flight, but let's say I was going to head down there to the Philly area. I'll put the flight on the map like this, and then it's easy to pop over to the airport and just look at its daily weather and see, okay, on Sunday, you know what, it's looking like it's going to be pretty good as well. So you can kind of like your idea before of generating a briefing pack to have everything kind of summary there. If you've got your whole route here, you can quickly jump along to each airport along the route and see how is the weather looking on the daily forecast.
Yeah, that's great. Another cool tip, if you're there and you hold anywhere on the map, in the top right, there's a WX button.
Good point.
That's a nice way to get. Yeah.
Yep, that lat long. What's the weather going to be like up there near Binghamton? So
10-day, anywhere in the world. Really, really powerful. And if you haven't used it yet, I'm convinced it'll be your favorite source of weather.
Alice, we've talked a lot about the weather aspects of flying in the winter, but something I think that bears considering is the airplane aspect. Are there things that you would take along flying in the winter that you wouldn't necessarily need in the summertime? And I have learned over time that I need a checklist to help make sure I'm walking out of the house with everything that is important for the flight. So I've actually set up a checklist here called Before Leaving House.
Nice.
And yeah, I've got flight bag items, other items, and so forth. But I don't really have this optimized for winter flying. So I figured this was a good opportunity to come in and add a few things. So I'm going to pop in here and say add a new check item, and it's extra blanket. Oops, blanket. In bag. And so now, as I was running through this checklist before I'm leaving the house, this would remind me to check, do I have a blanket with me? You know, it's you kind of hear pack for not your destination, but for everything in between if you end up landing short.
Right.
So what are some things you think about for wanting to have in the plane when you're flying in the winter versus the summer?
Yeah, well, I'm sure you'll be happy to have your blanket, even if you do make it to your destination where it's likely still cold. But something I look at, especially with my aircraft, is am I going to need to preheat in the future? Am I going for a weekend trip up north, somewhere cold? I'll actually look at the 10-day weather and see, hey, is it going to be below 30, below 40? My limit is 40 degrees for the next couple of days that I'm planning to be there. Yeah, perfect, below 40. And if it is, I'll bring my generator.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's definitely worth considering. Planes can obviously fly in pretty cold weather, but it's going to be a lot happier if you start it with the oil warmed up and with the instrument panel maybe a little bit warmed up. So
right.
If you've got an option to plug in for a preheat, anything like that is worth considering. And this is, there are a lot of pre-built checklists in ForeFlight that you can use for a lot of popular aircraft, but you've got a lot of flexibility to be able to build a checklist that exactly fits your flow and, helps remember the things that you may not, if you don't leave it in the plane, you wouldn't want to get to the airport and find, got to go back home because I forgot some item I need for this cold weather flight.
I've certainly done that more than a few times. So I think I'm going to take your advice and make one of these myself. Pretty cool.
Atlas, we've talked a lot about the pre-flight aspect of winter weather, and these days paying attention to weather doesn't end when you take off. And we've got some really phenomenal options for looking at weather in flight, whether it's an ADS-B receiver like a Sentry or a Sentry Plus or Sentry Mini, or an XM receiver like a GDL51 or GDL52, you get just an amazing array of weather products that let you stay up to date with what things look like as you're making a flight. I know it has transformed the way I fly more than just about anything except GPS.
Yeah.
It's something I'm very grateful for every time I fly.
Yeah, likewise, especially in the winter when we have threats like icing and things like the freezing level are a concern. Great to have those products available live and in flight.
Right.
What's a place we could look to get more information on some of those?
Yeah, so this table shows the types of products that are available with ADS-B. The advantage, obviously, of ADS-B is there's no charge to use it. You just have to buy a compatible receiver. With XM, you do have to pay a monthly subscription. It's not all that much in aviation terms, but it is something to consider. But you tend to get more products there. And we've actually got some details about how the weather is depicted with each of those receivers in the Legends guide in ForeFlight documents. So if you flip over here and go into the Legends document, I've got it pulled up here on the radar picture. And you can see we've got, because of the differences in the way that the weather is broadcast over each method, it's displayed kind of differently. So looking on the lower half of the page here, you can see with ADS-B, we've got 6 different strengths or intensities that are depicted with different colors. And if you look down with XM, we've got quite a bit more, including one that's particularly useful, and that is the mixed. So if it's rain that's tending to ice or snow, that's going to show up a lot more clearly with XM than you're going to see with ADS-B.
So Josh, one of the best products that I think we get in both of these ADS-B and SiriusXM in-flight receivers is the PIREPs. Incredible to have access to that other pilot information in flight and in the air, especially with ice reports.
Yeah, it's pretty neat when I'm flying along. If I'm going to give a PIREP, whether I'm using an ADS-B receiver or XM, I'll turn the PIREP layer on and then call in the PIREP. And usually within 10 or 15 minutes, I see it pop up back behind me by that point. But it's nice to know that that information is getting out and is broadcast and available for pilots anywhere.
Yes, you're helping pilots all in the system. And those are really, really cool tools, especially in winter flying. Well, Jay, I think that's all we have for today. Back to you.
Thanks, guys. Before we jump into some questions, I want to look at a few links that may be useful for you. And don't worry about copying them down right now. We'll make sure that we send you an email shortly with all of these in it. You can learn more about all of the features and ForeFlight guides discussed today at foreflight.com/support. There you'll also find our video library, which walks step by step through many features in ForeFlight. Next, Josh demoed a content pack that he created, allowing you to view all cold temperature restricted airports in the US directly in ForeFlight. You can find a link to download it and learn more about creating your own custom content in ForeFlight at foreflight.com/support/content-packs. You can register for more webinars and watch past ones at foreflight.com/webinars. And like I mentioned earlier, this webinar will be posted there by this time tomorrow. And lastly, if your question isn't answered today, or if you have any other questions or issues, you can always reach out to our pilot support team at team@foreflight.com. With that, let's move on to some questions. And we've had a lot of great questions come in today. Atlas, I think I'll send you the first question here. We've had a lot of questions asking about the differences between the HTML and PDF briefings. So could you show us how you can decide which one you want to use?
Yeah, let's do it. So key precursor here is the HTML briefing is only going to be available for US customers and US flights. But what we do is we come to flights and I'll generate a briefing here, and you can see this is going to be the HTML briefing that we were demoing in the webinar today. So this has the live sections on the side and some of this other content. If you're not seeing this and you're in the US, come to More, Settings, and scroll, or just type Briefing. And you can see this briefing format. I've got mine as HTML. That's the one that I use, but we could change that to PDF. And PDF will be the same. That's going to be the default outside the US. So if I come here and make a new flight now, how about from Albany to Syracuse, and I'm going to send this over to flights. If I generate a briefing for this, this is going to be the PDF briefing format. A bit less information, but slightly different format. Still gives you those great imagery packets that we mentioned earlier on, like the vertical cross-section chart, winds and temps, AirMat, SIGMAT, significant weather, and METARs and TAFs as well.
Thanks, Atlas. The second question I have for you is also about the briefing. Can you talk through the vertical cross-section chart? The person who asked this says, I haven't figured out how to take advantage of it because of the various symbols.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there and a lot to pull out. So let's get a new briefing and we'll switch back to the HTML format just because that's what I'm familiar with. But let's start picking it apart. This is under the forecast section, vertical cross-section chart. And here we can see the chart for our flight. Let's get this on the map just so we can see what we're working with. I'm going to send this flight to the map. And so here's the briefing for this flight today. Back to flights, got this briefing. At the bottom, you're going to see this sort of green area. That's terrain, obviously. So the blue is our flight path. You can see we're going to be climbing over top this terrain and have some pretty decent clearance here. The barbs are the winds aloft. So a small mark is 5 knots, a larger mark is 10. So if we look here at our top of climb, right around there, it looks like we've got, I see 1 small and 2 large barbs. So that's going to be 10, 20, 15, 25 knots, roughly tailwind, and temperatures below. So that's going to be -5. Icing symbols at the bottom. This is trace, light, moderate, and severe. And so it looks like we're going to be just barely above a trace icing layer here at top of climb, but we're going to be climbing through some moderate icing. So if we're not ice equipped, this is probably not going to be a good choice of flight. Again, lots of information here, and if you want to pick through it, 2 good options. We have a support document on the knowledge base on the website, which will be shared at the end of this, but also in the Documents tab. The whole ForeFlight mobile pilot guide is on your device already. So A1 here has more information on this wind chart. Here's a briefing tab, so here we can pick in and dive in. And if we really want to act like we're at school, you can actually annotate these even. So here we are. Short barbs are 5, all barbs are 10. So anyway, some light reading for you all to get through. The vertical cross-section chart in the briefing section of the ForeFlight Pilot's Guide.
Wonderful. Thanks, Atlas. Josh, I got a few questions for you as well. What is the difference between the global and U.S. icing and turbulence layers?
All right. The basic difference is in the extent of each one. So if we flip over to the US icing and zoom out here a little bit to sort of the more globe view, you can see that there is kind of a line in the hashes around here that shows the extent of the US icing chart. And in this chart, it is updated a little bit more frequently than the global chart, and the data is a little bit higher resolution. I'm just going to clear that. The US chart only goes out 18 hours. If we flip over to the global chart, you can see we're starting to fill in with icing around the globe, and if we turn around, you see we've got icing data out in parts of the globe that are definitely outside the US. This goes out about 24 hours, but it is not updated quite as frequently. And if you zoom in on an individual area, the actual data itself is a little bit coarser because it's covering more volume around the globe, essentially. And we've got details about those are actually in the pilot's guide. So if you go over into documents, I've got that pulled up here. In this case, it's in section 11 about the maps. So all the detail for the icing and then for the turbulence are shown there. You can see, looking at between the US and the global, the altitude increments are a little bit coarser for the global, and it's also only at higher altitudes there, above 12,000.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. The next one I have for you as well. When we were talking about checklists, can you show how to move those challenges up and down?
Yeah, so let me jump back in here. I've got the checklist that I had made. And if you're just getting into checklists, the best way to do it is come over into checklist, hit plus, and then you can dive in. And we've got all these different templates of aircraft in there. You can type in a filter, or you can just start with the basic one. But within a particular checklist, if you hit the edit button in the upper right, and then you've got the 3 stacked lines, if you hold on that, you can drag it up or down and kind of reposition it in the checklist where you want it to be.
Awesome. That's super helpful. It took me a minute to find that as well. And the last question I have for you, can you explain briefly how to use the TAF versus the MOS in flight planning?
Sure. Well, I'm not a CFI, so of course, if you're in a learning mode, make sure you talk with your CFI about this. But the TAF is kind of an official forecast that you might be using if you're planning an IFR flight. And the MOS is a computer-generated forecast, but it's based on tools that the forecasters that are generating the TAF also have access to. So if, let's see here, we'll pick Indianapolis. If we come in here and we look at the forecast, and in this case, we've got the TAF. Now, a great thing that actually Atlas and I didn't get into in the body of our presentation there was the forecast discussion. And this is a really helpful tool to see what the forecaster is kind of thinking about that doesn't fit into what they're going to put into the actual kind of abbreviated TAF, but you can get a really better understanding of their mindset as they're generating the TAF by reading the discussion there. But within the TAF, we've got, the 1 o'clock, the 4 o'clock, 11 o'clock. So it's in fairly coarse time chunks, but then it looks out a pretty decent level out to 3 o'clock tomorrow. If we flip over to the MOS, it is model output statistics. So it's a computer-based model, but it's kind of aviation oriented and is pretty handy to be able to look out a little bit farther ahead than the TAF is going to go. So 2 a.m., 5 a.m., 7 a.m., 10 a.m. tomorrow, 11, we're already looking out into tomorrow afternoon. So, if you're deciding on your IFR alternate, you're going to want to look at the TAF. But if you're trying to get a very, I'd say, aviation-specific forecast look, looking at the MOS is a great way to do it. And I think you use this in conjunction with a tool like the daily weather to kind of gain confidence that the weather is going to be what the forecast is showing it's going to be, or if you see wildly divergent forecasts because they're generated with different forecast models, that's a pretty good indicator, I think, that you should expect change as the weather unfolds.
Perfect. Thanks, Josh. Atlas, I have one more question for you. Any tricks to quickly see Zulu time?
Yes, I saw someone ask this, and I thought, aha, I do know a quick way to do that. So this little speedometer icon up here is your instruments panel. And if you don't use this now, this is configurable between tons of different instruments you like, one of which is Zulu time. So if you're looking for it, feel free to toss that in any of your open instruments. And there's a quick at-a-glance Zulu time for you.
Just to add on to that, we can't really show it because the screen won't rotate, but when you have your iPad in landscape mode, it shows you additional instruments that don't show when you put it in portrait. So personally, what I do is put Zulu time in that far right slot, and I normally fly with the iPad in portrait. But if I ever need Zulu, I can just quickly roll it 90 over and Zulu time pops right up.
Nice. I think I'm going to start doing the same thing. That's clever.
That's fantastic. Well, that is all we have for today. I just want to go over these links one more time. We've talked about our support page a lot, and the Pilot's Guide and the Legends Guide. You can find those and links to a lot of other great resources at foreflight.com/support. And again, you can also find those guides in ForeFlight using in the Documents tab in the ForeFlight folder. You can learn more about custom content, including the cold temperature restricted airports. You can download that content pack at foreflight.com/support/content-packs. You can register for more webinars and watch past ones at foreflight.com/webinars. And if you have any question, whether it's one that wasn't answered today or you just have any others come up in the future, you can always reach out to our pilot support team at foreflight.com. We appreciate you coming today, and we'll see you on the next webinar.